So now we've entered the top 10, and this is where my personal favorites actually come into view, starting out with the good old Rumpelstiltskin from Shrek Forever After. He's the type of villain I actually wanted out of something like Shrek the Third, where this film is in fact the real third Shrek after the side story that no one actually really wants to remember, and truly an upgrade from the lackluster performance that Prince Charming gave as a main villain. He's also like an upgrade on Farquaad being a short villain who impacts Shrek in a meaningful way with the powers he has to make deals with other people. I mean, after all, his life was actually impacted by Shrek in the first film because he found Fiona at the time and ruined his plan of becoming ruler of Far Far Away. Once again, more better as a villain than charming in actually taking over the kingdom. It's all done in this way that causes Shrek to disappear within 24 hours because of his manipulative deal to get what he wants and erasing the mistakes that he actually caused. One that makes Shrek realize what he had in his life before this point with Fiona and his friends, which is great development for Shrek's character from one who is a snarky, sinister, pugnacious, and ungenerous man who would do whatever it takes to claim the throne of Far Far Away, showing no care for anybody else's life, such as removing Shrek and his kids from existence. Above all, what really matters to him the most is his pet goose Fifi, which I really love about him being the only thing he cared about. So I think actually all in all, being number 10 is really justifiable because he is that little amalgamation of all the Shrek villains combined in the perfect conclusion that is to that, despite not as good as one other, and of course the Puss in Boots villains.
Of course.
Grimmo is another villain I've already talked about in extensive detail, and for good reasons to what he represents, because he truly is a great definition.
Yeah, I really like the How to Train Your Dragon series. I think it's a great trilogy.
To what a main antagonist
He's the antagonist of the third one, by the way.
is, being the hiccup if he actually wanted to kill the dragons instead, which he is also responsible for bringing the complete extinction of the Night Furies, the dragons that Hiccup connected with that caused the events of the movies to actually be in motion. He's essentially what Hiccup could have been if the latter actually took a darker path by killing Toothless in the first film, demonstrated by his design and how, unlike Drago, he relies on wits and manipulation to get his way, and still much like Hiccup, who wasn't physically strong either. He's literally the mentally stronger
built like
version
Hiccup.
of Drago in all aspects that represents how sometimes dragons and humans cannot coexist because of how someone power and control and something we cannot stop. These are things I've already mentioned too, so I wanted to keep this relatively brief of that impact. One where we see he is right by the end because of those consequences. Maybe not in all aspects, but still proven right by how he is as a person, being the antithesis of Hiccup in all ways. One that actually could have won overall in the entire series if it weren't for characters like Hiccup being that polar opposite. The Verminator is a classic villain that is probably one of the best in all of animation, despite having no reason to actually be considered this way, considering how many other compelling villains there are before or after him. But I include him here this high like I did with Chef Skinner for Pixar because I always love these types of villains that leave a lasting impression no matter the circumstance. This is also where I include a little bit of Vincent and Gladys in that being the real main villains of that impact the characters more, mainly because of how the Verminator is that bridge between them to connect them with that world to actually have any action throughout. Two sides of the animal kingdom mushed together to produce this most iconic Dreamworks villain that is certainly one of the most funniest and greatest that they have to offer. It's one that in another life, if I were willing, I would certainly rank him as number 1, but still suffices to be at this position for who he actually is. I mean, the actual funniest thing about his character is how he's voiced by Thomas Hayden Church, who the very next year after this actually starred as Sandman in Spider-Man 3, portraying such totally different villains back-to-back years, which is so interesting and bizarre to learn about. Everything about Dwayne LaFontaine really adds to the zany nature of Over the Hedge that really makes it a good film. I mean, without him, this film would actually be okay, but with him, he really makes this movie what it was when I was a child, being such a great experience. He's like Hades in the way that you really can't hate him, despite actually being a threat to the main characters because of how fun everything is around him and every single performance that is delivered in the most comedic way possible, with the most over-the-top performance I've ever seen. I mean, there's just so much to talk about him that makes him a great villain, but for the sake of my sanity and your time, I would just leave it here with the Verminator being the perfect villain who perfectly balances out the entire movie with the threat he poses and the fact he has the D-Pelter turbo that is illegal in every state except Texas, and the fact he gets his butt eaten by a dog at the end, which is sad to think about because all this time he was just doing his job, where for the sake of the movie's focus, he had to be defeated. Literally the best
He was just doing his job.
if I didn't know these others actually existed.
He was doing his job.
To be honest, I really had a
Oh,
hard time with
fuck
this
yeah.
pick, but I just value the
Hell yeah, let's go.
other villains a lot more on this list, despite Tai Lung remaining to be the biggest threat that Dreamworks has ever produced. And once again, I've already covered him in my last video if you want to check out more of that, but I'll go through it again for the sake of it. Because Kung Fu Panda villains really represent the aspects of power very greatly, and Tai Lung was actually the perfect to start out with a character being so good at Kung Fu like a protege. Just unfortunate for characters like Shifu cause he raised him and trained him to be the best, but how others like Oogway actually knew of the darkness inside him, how he didn't understand the true meaning of power like what Po had, knowing what it actually meant for all along. Just portrayed as a side more ignorant to the meaning of what the Dragon Scroll was trying to teach, and how Po understood more that as a character that grew throughout the film. It's just such a delight that impact the main characters in a special way about the wrong and right way to teach somebody about the lessons in power. And I wish I could rank him higher, but I just hold these favorites in a more higher regard as we will see.
Love Tai Lung. He's an awesome villain.
Lord Shen is truly the greatest
Lord
Kung Fu Panda
Shen!
villain ever in my
Kung Fu Panda 2! The Peacock.
Lord Shen is truly the greatest Kung Fu Panda villain ever in my opinion that impacted Po in a different way.
Yeah, he's a
Responsible
little
for
bit
the
ahead of
deaths
Tai Lung,
his
I
own
agree.
family and the true threat above all Dreamworks villains for what he does. And once again, like Tai Lung, this impact comes from his lust for power, which is done in a more technological way rather than the plain old Kung Fu and physical way that he actually wants to get rid of. Coming from a place that is lacking in love, this being so focused on the material yet again. This is something I've already touched in also if you want to watch that Dreamworks video, so I'll keep it brief once again because of how his actions alienated himself from his parents who actually loved him but just so blind to actually see the cost of his own lust for power. How we see this concept of the self-fulfilling prophecy actually executed so well because of the cost of these actions due to a person if left unchecked. One that actually affects the main character in a meaningful way, where we know how he actually ended up like this, that actually made Po appreciate the family he made along the way, where Shen just actually stopped caring about. It's amazing how he had all the opportunities to stop if he actually decided to actually look in front of them, but refused because of what he attached himself to in the material that led to his own demise in the end. In short, he's one of the scariest Dreamworks villains for what he did in the aspects of power that isn't delivered physically, but rather mentally.
I agree with that.
Hal is just one of my personal favorite Dreamworks villains ever created for
Yeah.
a story that really focused on its villains. It's an interesting take on what happens when power is given to the nice guy incel who is just a creep in it for the girl without any of the effort or means to be a hero. How Megamind really didn't understand what it meant to be because of what he was missing being the villain all his life, and finding a way to get it back so fast caught up with a dude who really didn't actually deserve to have that power to begin with. And that's something he admits himself when he gets those powers, and how we see him control those powers throughout his interaction with Roxanne Ritchie, being her cameraman at first and now having the power that most heroes have to swoon over the girl that he think he attained, where he realized he can't because she doesn't actually like him this way, and knowing who he truly is as a person. When that actually turns him against being a hero because he actually doesn't understand that being in it for himself, and I really think that Jonah Hill did a good job in portraying that aspect. He just really thinks that having these powers is enough to attain everything he would in life, but just doesn't work knowing that our heroes act out of the selflessness of others rather than the selfishness of one's own desire. And this is
It's actually a really well written villain. Yeah.
something even he knows himself to a certain degree, where he admits to Roxanne that she sees in the good to others even when it's not there. How he admits that not everyone actually deserves to be saved based upon the delusions that don't really exist in other people. He's just a great contrast for Megamind to learn on his journey about being good and the perks that it has because of how he's worked so hard in his life to achieve his goals, while seeing that others in Hell just want to take the easy way out for what he experienced, getting to the end without being changed by the very journey in any way or wanting to be at all. It's really the best way to balance out what a supervillain actually should be in the most unlikely way possible, having a comedic low-life incel who doesn't achieve much in his life and does it in the most unlikable way possible. A guy who deserves his own video on why this actually should be as well. Let's be honest, there was no way I wasn't going to include Jack Horner high up on this list.
Lil Jack Horner sat in his corner. John Mulaney voiced this guy to perfection too.
Considering what he did to shape this very channel. He is just one of those villains being self-aware that he is a villain for the sake of villainy and power because everyone actually forgot about him and he wants to be powerful to all. because we already know at this stage in his life he's attained so much with that anyone would want to be successful on their own with a pie business, and how we learned he got obsessed with his fairy tale creatures and magic just like Farquaad and other Shrek villains that surpass their own. It's just a delight how he shows no remorse for killing his own men or just others in general so he can get what he wants in the most comedic way possible. Everything about him makes him stand out as the perfect villain because he fits the very definition of being one that I love to thank him and the YouTube algorithm for providing me to putting on the map for talking about him. And
Yeah, he's essentially just like a sociopath, which is, yeah, those folks exist.
his attitude and arrogance is very important in the journey of Puss's adventure with life and death chasing after him. One where I decided to exclude Goldilocks on this list because she is redeemed by the end, knowing her true family she learned from, one where she was actually more of a co-protagonist in her own right, and her adventure that just conflicted with Puss's goal for a singular wish that only one can make, and helping out when they finally found those aspects out about life, and how Jack Horner almost got his wish. One where we see, because of his own arrogance and uncaring attitude of others, taking delight in villainy, becomes the only real character to actually die by the end of the film because of this hubris. Just another great villain who didn't
What did I do to deserve this? No, I mean, what did I do specifically?
actually need too much, and balance out everything well in a film that got a lot right with so much going on. No, this is where I really had a hard time because of how
No, number 3! He's my number 1! He's the goat! He's the wolf.
great Death was as a villain, but one where I think you can understand, as we will see with the top 3, because he's probably one of the best, where I hold these villains in the most high esteem of all of Dreamworks history. For now, considering how much the Puss in Boots holds it that is perfect in villainy, Death really truly stands out on the top for being one of a force of nature portrayed in a physically threatening way that actually puts the fear into Puss for what is to come and what he wasted. That this entire journey happened based upon those facts that are truly enjoyable to see throughout.
So, the reason I was even doing this list was because I wanted to see how high Death was. Because he's my favorite DreamWorks villain of all time, for sure. And he's one of my favorite movie villains of all time. Absolutely love Death.
Throughout his adventure, and the panic he goes throughout when he sees he faces his own mortality. It's really done well in this way that makes you feel you cannot stop him as a villain because of those certain aspects, that you cannot do anything no matter how hard you try to fight or whatever that you come into contact, because you know it's death itself, despite not being able to see that until the third act of the film, towards the end when he does realize that you probably somehow actually know within his first encounter where his life flashes before his eyes that it is death itself right in front of you, and how you actually certainly see that he feels that too. There's just so much about him that makes him stand out as a villain, that is just one who's doing his job, being the physical and mental threat that he faces throughout the course of the film, and learning about the importance of life around him. The one where he
Also, the whistle is iconic.
actually makes him realize his mistakes and what he missed out due to his uncaring attitude. This is what we see at the end where he gets defeated, but one where we know he isn't truly defeated because he is death itself, fulfilling his job, just chasing a cat who wasted his 9 lives, but now seeing he understands the value of that very life, and no longer fearing that aspect, allowing him to live as well until the very end where he could see him again. Just one of those villains that are portrayed well with who they are and what they're supposed to represent, and I applaud Puss in Boots for being the masterpiece in showing that value of life.
It's a masterpiece. Puss in Boots, The Last Wish, is a masterpiece.
This was another hard one to figure
Oh,
out,
yeah,
but
no, this is a
considering
fucking-
villains and what they represent by definition, I think I was very justified to put Ramesses in second place also. Because
Yeah.
Ramesses is the most rich antagonist ever created to represent the pharaoh in the book of Exodus. It is just so rich and compelling that the Prince of Egypt is truly one of the greatest DreamWorks films ever, filled in the sea with boss babies and trolls. And yet again, he's another I've already talked about in extensive detail because of how rich he is as a character and as an antagonist to another level that affects the protagonist in a meaningful way, and Moses' story, considering that they were brothers who loved each other. His actions are done to fulfill his family's legacy and the pressures to hold up an empire, being berated as a weak link, and it shows. He's definitely not a villain in the traditional sense, but one who acts out of the weakness others actually sees in him, not acting out of complete disregard for others because he actually wants to, but because he has to. And we can see that when everything is taken away from him when his brother leaves, and that he's bestowed with the power as pharaoh after his father passes, how he tries to uphold these responsibilities as a leader to the best of his abilities regardless of the consequences he carries around him. The burden of a legacy of horrors for the Hebrews, which he shows little care towards because he cannot let go of that very legacy, even if it costs his own people's lives, as we see when he allows his heart to get hardened. And once again, like I mentioned before, Rafe Fiennes does a fantastic job in portraying him and the conflict he has has with Moses and setting his people free, constantly tossing with the idea of his family and brother, yet still confined and bitter to what he was deemed when he was younger. It's how something impacts you in a certain way that lives on for the rest of your life for better and worse, and how that results in your own destruction at the very end. He's just a man you actually want to root for, like how Moses actually wants him to change for the better, to see how much we wanted him to see that light that even I think God wants, but knows that he chose this path for himself of destruction, and how we know the story and how it's supposed to go because of how he decided that no matter what we think otherwise, how someone can do this because of the way they are and refuse to turn back otherwise, that seems weak to give up what they actually gained. How he rejects every path he has to turn against that when it seemed like he could because of what he knows what he had with his family. That he demonstrates he does care but chooses every opportunity to not do that costed him that, in the end, losing his father, his son, and his brother, and how that actually stayed with him for the rest of his life. It's something we don't want to see, but has to happen in a world where God punishes those who does not fulfill his divine purpose, despite his many opportunities to have to be changed until their very last breath. All in all, he is the most complete Dreamworks antagonist ever, and quite possibly one of the greatest villains in all of cinematic history.
He's really good. I still prefer Death,
And yep,
but
the final one out
of
of all
course
of them has to be Fairy Godmother
it has to be Fairy Godmother. If it's not Death, if it's not Ramses.
herself. The true perfect villain that Dreamworks has ever produced, and trying to make the twist on the fairy tales in such unique ways, and really using harmless Fairy Godmother to be that villain is absolutely perfect in that aspect. She is truly the smartest and most manipulative one out of all of them, who gets what she wants every single time and displays this in so many ways that makes her effective to be that way. She often seeks to get the best for herself and her son Prince Charming rather than others, often resorting to blackmail and trickery through her magic to get her way. And what we saw through later in Dreamworks movies and Shrek villains, we could see how she truly set the standard in one of the greatest sequels that was ever made in all of cinema history. And I really love how she has this business selling potions that are mostly
Is Shrek 2 one of the greatest sequels in cinema history? Yeah. I don't really have to think about that too hard. Yeah, it is.
scams to get what she wants represented in a real way, compared to other shady business practices that most people actually give in to quite easily into the tagline of happily ever after, except for ogres. The way she manipulates Shrek and Fiona is really effective, more so than you realize, and how she's able to convince both of them to equally different degrees. How she degrades Shrek at first for being an ogre whom everyone hates and gets no happy endings, to pretending to actually care for Fiona's best interests by having her son manipulate her into believing that he is the human version of Shrek, despite the clear differences she notices until she's supposed to drink the love potion she gave to Harold. How she's able to counter everything our heroes have to offer within a second until the very end, where I really love how Jennifer Saunders played that to perfection, to the acting, to the singing, and the comedy that is provided. She has no qualms about using her magic to get what she wants, and is spiteful toward those who interferes with their plans or business. The fairy godmother is just no fool. She uses any and every underhand trick that just makes her appear more benevolent and kinder than she really is. I just love how she pretends to be this kind and gentle at the beginning when the moment actually calls for it, but if there's any interference with that, she shows her true colors as a villain. She is just so ruthless and unreasonable, vengeful, evil, cruel, selfish, and will stop at nothing to remove those who stand in her way until the very end, when she's defeated when her spell is reflected by Harold, disappearing as tiny bubbles and gone for all of eternity. She is truly everything you want in a villain, and really did set the standard of modern villainy in all of its aspects that we know of today. The perfect one to close out this entire list as stands, where no one actually before could actually top her in personality, and no one after could actually stand above in villainy. Thus concluding this on the highest of notes that held out for a hero until the very end. All in all, Dreamworks villains are mostly fun when they need them to be, but also very emotional when the moments actually call for it. And to this day, they manage to be the most interesting collection of stories for better and worse, and their villains really represent that and proves how much they can do in any style of film they actually choose to represent. From the compelling emotion of Ramses to the comedic laughs of the Verminator, they are truly the bunch with the most variety to offer. And with that said, let's hope Dreamworks can still provide this variety for a long time coming, and I'm all done.
Yeah, good list. Good list, fam. I'll probably do his top Disney heroes, although this thumbnail spoiled it, I think. Death! The wolf.